the resolution is basically a statement to the university that we want to take action. Go ahead.
So why are you calling on the university to take action in something that the university can't do?
Okay, I'll give you a personal anecdote. So on the day that this bake sale took place, I was walking by that bake sale with a tour of 15 minority students from Dallas, Texas. And as those students walked by, they said, "Sir, why is one of the bake sales saying non-racist bake sale?" And you know why they were asking that? It's because YCT was standing right next to them saying, "Here's this affirmative action bake sale," and this amassed a huge crowd. And the huge crowd has just gone on, just different social medias, and we've seen it all over the news, but to kind of land the plane here a little bit, the reason why we want this legal action to take place is because students of color are scared to come to this university, and that's because we are not protected by this university. When incidents like this take place, it's freedom of speech, but of course, what are we supposed to do when we go to class the next day and we look around and there's only one black person? What are we supposed to think? Does this university really? Okay, go ahead. All right.
And with that, question and answer has expired.
I move to extend Q&A by 5 minutes.
Is the motion seconded?
Second.
Are there any objections to the motion? Hearing none, the motion passes. Could you, 5 minutes? Okay, we'll begin a 5-minute period of question and answer with Representative Hopkins.
I see that 2 of the 3 examples that you have on here are examples of schools suspending organizations for different actions, whereas you're calling here for outright disbanding. Can you kind of explain the thought process behind, rather than calling on something that seems a little bit more common in just in a suspension or whatnot, versus a full-on disbanding?
So usually when organizations are suspended, it's because there's a hope that they can redevelop themselves in the future. The organization that we're talking about has a track record longer than a decade that shows us that what's embedded in their culture is racism, is discrimination, is prejudice. So I don't think that actually suspending them and offering them time to redevelop themselves will actually yield anything different from what we've been seeing for the past 2 years.
Representative Reed, did you still have your question?
Yes. I was a little confused by your last answer. Previously you had said that this was not a legal action, and then you said you were calling on the university to take a legal action. Could you just explain, do you think the university will do this? And do you think we are in the right to call upon the university to do this?
I misspoke a second ago when I called the university to take a legal action. I would rather more see an overarching policy that kind of addresses this sort of incident from occurring. So when this, say for example, this incident does occur, I would like the university to have some kind of hand in what does happen. That way, it's just not. It's openly permitted. Free speech is openly permitted, but there should be some type of kind of consequence for this action.
Representative Hashem.
James Hashem, Natural Sciences. In the second "be it further resolved" clause, it says SG calls upon the university to include education and disciplinary actions in TAFE incident policy. What does it mean when you say education?
So it will be as simple as university-wide orientation on how not to be a racist. Maybe for incoming freshmen or transfer students, they'll attend this mandatorily, and we'll teach them. You know what? Next time you want to talk about a controversial topic, don't be a racist about it, and we'll let them know, and that's how we educate them. So in the future, if they do want to have a dialogue, civil dialogue, they don't have to offend us emotionally or invalidate our existence or academic qualifications. So we can be on the equal side finally and have this dialogue. So, lots of questions.
Lots of questions. We're proceeding next with Financial Director Harper. I believe one of you mentioned in your explanation of the legislation that this helps to support minority viewpoints around campus, and we want to be supportive of expressing those. Would disbanding YCT be silencing a minority viewpoint on campus?
How are they a minority?
I think just by what we've seen, the people we've all talked to, that we see most people are not supporting their actions, and they are in the minority in their beliefs and their offensive attitudes and expression.
I don't know where you gathered that data from. I haven't seen any statistics showing that they're actually in the minority. We can work to verify that on a later date, maybe. But I think that these people, so the people who are overwhelmingly a part of YCT, are not people who are subjected to multiple forms of institutionalized racism, discrimination of any form. So I think that the precedent, what should take precedent in this situation, is the group of students who are in fact subjected to many forms of discrimination on a daily basis. So many forms that it makes it difficult for them to even get a degree here. I don't think YCT has any trouble going to class. I mean, clearly they have free time to do this type of stuff. So I think, you know.
Representative Santoyo.
Do you at all feel like some students would agree with disbanding, but maybe disagree with another part of it, or vice versa? Would you be willing to maybe split this resolution into two separate? Because I can foresee some students being all about, yeah, let's have UT meet future incidents of bias with punitive action, but they may not necessarily agree with disbanding. How do you feel about maybe doing that? If some students hear this tomorrow and think that's the feedback they might have.
Just as a clarification, time has expired. You're allowed to finish answering the question now.
Okay, so to answer that, I think that kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier when I was speaking about the nature of compromise and decisions, and specifically, like, I'm all for pragmatism, but I think that it has a very different kind of role in the way that it plays in conversation specifically about race. And in this particular legislation, like, obviously we were thinking, we know that it's going to be a contentious thing. We know that people are going to have a difficult time agreeing to how extreme it is. That wasn't something we weren't aware of. But in regards to actually going back on that and trying to fix it, I think that would go against the statement that we're trying to make as members of the student body who are representing the people who are at that event and who were also affected by it and who weren't able to make it.
But you'd be putting the same thing out.
Representative Santoyo's time for question and answer has expired.
I move to extend Q&A by 5 minutes.
The motion on the floor is to extend question and answer by 5 minutes. Is it seconded?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any objections to the motion? Hearing none, it is approved. We will continue with question and answer, a 5-minute period of question and answer with Representative Madden if he still has his question.
I'd like to yield 2 minutes to Associate Director of Viability.
Okay, could someone hand the microphone?
Okay,
And just reminder to everyone, with regard to prefacing, a sentence before the question is fine. Anything more than that is going on into argumentation. That's for debate, not for question and answer.
Absolutely. So given the university's stance against punitive action they released a couple hours ago, would you be open to, instead of advocating for disbandment, changing the legislation to require YCT to obtain clearance of any future event from the Campus Advisory Climate Board, so as to preserve their freedom of speech in any future matter?
Next on the queue is Representative Hawkins.
Just kind of going along with the points on education. Was there any thought of maybe including something or some method by which the members or the organization of the Young Conservatives could be educated or attempts to educate them for this ignorance?
I think the fundamental problem is that it doesn't seem like this organization really wants to be educated, and that's reflected in the way that they presented their discussion about affirmative action, having it as an ironic or satirical kind of basil that really reduces people down to price values, right? They knew it was they knew that it was a sensitive issue, and they chose to still respond to it in an insensitive way. So educational policies we don't think would actually work necessarily in the context of this specific organization.
Well, why not amend the legislation to
Representative Hopkins, you do get one question. You can be added to the queue again. And we're up next with Representative Ida Nothing.
So I intend this to be like a neutral question, but considering the past events, especially in the whereas statements on your bill, why now and why weren't there any similar propositions before? I'm just curious.
There were petitions made in the past that were brought to either the campus climate report team or the dean of students, but it resulted in no action. So that's why, because of how widespread the live stream video was and how it garnered national attention, that's why we are putting an end to this series of racist events now. And adding on to it, can I answer like another question that was like thrown out before?
In debate, if it comes up.
Okay.
Up next is Representative Reed.
So I'm still a little confused about my previous question. Could you give me a yes or a no answer to this? Do you think UT is within their legal right to disband YCT?
Yes, if the university policy said that any form of speech shouldn't threaten student safety, right? And just right to exist on campus. Yes, I think so.
Representative Engel.
Hi. So you guys write in the second, be it further resolved, that you want to include the education and disciplinary actions, basically talking about the hate incident policy, but who gets to define what is hate speech, considering a lot of different groups consider different points of view to be hate speech?
That's a really good point, and I think that that's kind of our argument as well. That's part of why we still think that this isn't violating any kind of First Amendment right. Hate speech, especially as it is in kind of the way that it forms or the way that it is seen in, especially on a university campus, racism is still very much present, but the way that, it's not necessarily like someone has to have a bottle necessarily thrown at them and someone has to shout at them for that to be, the only thing that is classified as a hate crime. There's other forms of, violent actions that still occur through rhetoric and through other kinds of statements that people make. And even the way that they sort of support or like present it, I think is an example of that just by the way that it affected people, right? Like it could be considered hate.
Also, just for clarification, your question about the criteria of a bias or a hate crime policy, that's already been determined by the university. So whenever that comes out, I'll make sure to send you a copy.
We do have 30 seconds left in question and answer. The chair's going to absorb that because that is negligible time. Are there any motions on the floor?
I move to extend Q&A by 5 minutes.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Are there any objections? Hearing none, it's extended by 5 minutes. And we'll begin with Representative Hoffman again.
So I was just wondering if y'all had maybe considered the possibility of, rather than disbanding, going to a suspension, but having that suspension prefaced on the idea that they would have to, the members would have to complete some kind of education or training in terms of kind of learning, trying to resolve both issues.
We already said no to that because, the reason why we said no is because they don't want to be educated. So when the protesters were there at the bake sale, telling them the facts about affirmative action, they refused to listen. So when we told the two white women of who were tabling the bake sale, we told them that they were the biggest beneficiary of affirmative action, and they just shrugged. They don't want to be educated on this type of fact. And another thing is that they co-opted Asian Americans as the smallest beneficiary of affirmative action, which is not intellectually honest at all. So we told them that Asian Americans were actually benefited from affirmative action. They shrugged again. So, they don't want to be educated. We tell them all these facts, but they deny them. So I don't think any kind of training or seminar will help them change their mind that affirmative action is a just thing. Thank you.
I would just like to make note, and the time is paused. If you have questions that have been answered before in some fashion, those could possibly be answered in committee if you have a specific nuance to them. We want to get as many, unique questions on the floor so that way we're presenting a larger variety of questions. Representative Huerta.
Representative Huerta, UI rep. Have you spoken to anyone in YCT to see if they would be interested in having a conversation or something productive or some type of like sensitivity workshop for them since the big sale?
No, because I feel like the fact that they denied my facts, that denied the correct information of affirmative action, I don't think they will want to have a dialogue with me any further. And I do not want to go near those students involved in the bake sale because they physically and mentally just, harmed me. So I don't wish to speak to them.
Chief of Staff Carter.
Guys, thank you guys for doing this, and for all the students back there. I'm sure they appreciate you guys standing on the front lines for this. A point of clarification for me. Was this bill written in opposition to those who oppose affirmative action, or is this bill written in opposition to those who took a controversial policy like affirmative action and turned it into a sarcastic, offensive, and racist incident?
The latter.
Thank you.
Representative Reed.
I'm not sure you really understood my last question, because when I asked about legality, you cited UT policy. Maybe I can state it more clearly. Do you think that that banning YCT would violate their First Amendment rights?
I said no within the context of the First Amendment. I said that this still is classified as hate speech, right? And so within that, the First Amendment is not free for all, right? It still has restrictions upon what can and cannot be said. Granted that, hate speech is not allowed, and we and other students have perceived the actions from the bake sale as a form of hate speech. And that is the controversial decision, I think, or the controversial, that is what the point of controversy is, rather, because people seem to not think that this is, hateful because it wasn't explicit. No one actually got, physically, I can't even say that. People did get physically hurt in some ways. So, I mean, yeah, it's still hate speech. It's classified.
Representative Mumford.
Hello. I was just wondering, in your whereas clause 12 about the university, the whereas clause 16, in 2015, University of Oklahoma, President Lauren removed SAE chapter from campus. Where your evidence was for that, because it says that it's cited elsewhere, but it's not actually found in the document. And then also in whereas clause 18, the article that was cited for the University of Missouri cause or incident, why it wasn't mentioned that elsewhere in that article it says that that fraternity was suspended for other reasons as well, such as alcohol violations and other problems that they were having. And then finally, why the article cited for the clause about the bleach bombs on campus says no proof of bleach bombs in West Campus, and talks about how they actually didn't find any bleach in those bombs.
Okay, so I'll start with the bleach bombs. What we raised as an issue in our legislation was UT's response to investigate. We don't say that they didn't do anything, we say they didn't investigate quickly enough because it took a very long time, months, for UT to even really get into the issue, and then the initial investigations were very lackluster, and it was so much outcry to get them to take it seriously and really look into if there were bleach bombs and what was going on. On the OU, I'm happy to look at the legislation and see what's cited, but I know on the original legislation we had an article directly about it, but President Borden's statement that came out right after the event is very accessible online. I'm happy to send it to you right now. I can Facebook message it to you, and that's what I'm referencing with that. And then on the other one, the action was taken right after their incident with insults, and so that's why it's cited, because it was done in response to that.
And with that, time for question and answer has expired. At this point, unless there are any motions on the floor, I can commit it to a committee. And this resolution in particular would go to the Student Affairs Committee.